Hi everybody, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and I'm bringing you another chart reading. Today I'm going to be looking at the chart of Bono, the lead singer of the band U2. And the reason I've decided to do this chart is because U2 is touring again. They are celebrating, I believe it's the 30th anniversary of their Joshua Tree album release. So they are doing a world tour, and they've entered my consciousness specifically because recently at the beginning of September, Bono was performing a concert in Berlin with U2, and he all of a sudden lost his voice and had to cancel the show. But fortunately, it wasn't anything serious, and he was able to reschedule and get going again with the rest of the tour. So if you want to follow along, Bono was born on May 10th, 1960 in Dublin, Ireland, and we do have a birth time of 2 a.m. Bono is a Taurus. His sun is at 19 degrees. And I really see that in him. If you think about Taurus energy, they're ruled by the planet Venus. They're often very kind of calm and mellow. It takes a lot to really rile them up. And he just kind of has that vibe about him. His Mercury is also in Taurus at 10 degrees, and it's next to his Venus at 7 degrees of Taurus. So to have Mercury and Venus together means that your communication and your ability to think and speak blend with the energy of Venus, which is symbolic of our creative expression, really more around like creating beauty too, so through our creative expression. So in some ways it's like he's really just got this gift of an ability to communicate beautifully. And then in Taurus, which is the sign that's ruled by Venus, that adds another layer of expressing himself in a beautiful way. And actually, Taurus rules the throat. Every sign rules a body part. So to me, his Venus conjunct Mercury in Taurus is one expression of his musical ability in his chart. There's more though too. So those are his three planets in Taurus. Then he's got something interesting. He's got Saturn in Capricorn at 18 degrees conjuncting or sitting on his ascendant, his Capricorn ascendant at 22 degrees. And the ascendant has to do with what I call like the mask that we wear when we're interfacing with the world. So it also relates also to our physical appearance in that sense. And when you have Saturn right there, that means that you're going to have a pretty serious tone to how you bring yourself out into the world, how you interface, because Saturn is the energy of discipline and focus. It's also the energy of somebody who, or the energy of lessons, but also in some ways being a teacher of lessons too. And you kind of get that feeling about him. He's sort of like this father figure in certain ways, in the sense that he has a lot to say in what he sings about. Also, he does a lot of humanitarian work, which really also is spreading lessons about how we should treat one another, and the fact that we do need to really continue to care about people. So one thing about having Saturn on the ascendant also is that it can kind of make you old at a young age, and then you get a little bit younger as you get older. And I know in his life, his mother passed when he was a teen, and it was his father and his brother and himself in the house. And that's a pretty serious thing to have to deal with as a young person, your mother passing away. And so I see that Saturn on his ascendant as somebody who had to really kind of take responsibility for himself at a young age. In fact, I read something where his dad said after, I believe Bono graduated from high school, his dad said, you can spend like 1 year at the house, but if you don't pay your way, you're going to be thrown out, essentially. So it's that kind of energy to have Saturn on that ascendant that one may experience in their life. But again, they get younger as they get older because, Saturn learns how to kind of look at life in a more humorous way, after dealing with so much as they grow. And one other thing I wanted to mention about Saturn conjunct the ascendant, that in this book called The Astrologer's Handbook by Francis Sakoian and Louis Acker, is that the conjunction creates difficulties and hardship in early life. I already talked about that. And these people are likely to either be bony and tall or so reduced in stature as to have a dwarf-like appearance. And I find that interesting because to me, Bono does kind of have that sort of hobbit look about him, and I feel like he's always in sort of a heel of some sort to make himself a little bit taller. It's not a judgment, it's just that's how his physical nature, looks. So I found that reading to be kind of appropriate in his situation. Now, that sun in Taurus at 19 degrees is trine to that Saturn at 18 degrees. So he really came into this life with an ability to really work hard because it's his individuality blending very easily with this work nature, Saturn, our ability to focus and discipline ourselves. So that just is a really, gift that he came into this world with. Now, what's also interesting is that he's got his moon in Scorpio at 2 degrees conjunct his Neptune in Scorpio at 17 degrees. Towards the top of his chart, it's really right on the cusp of his 9th house. And what's interesting is that Bono grew up in a house where his parents had 2 different faiths. One of them was a Catholic and one of them was a Protestant. And he himself has been also quoted as saying on the website called atu2.com that born to a Roman Catholic father and a Protestant mother in the sectarian strife of the 1960s Ireland, Bono has more than a few reasons to trust disorganized religion. Far too often, Bono did not see his experience of Christian faith reflected in what he saw as a preachy moralism that neglects the poor and usually, quote, gets in the way of God. And it goes on to talk about how Bono realized that, religious people do a lot of wonderful things for people. And so he needed to learn how to connect with people who had strong faith in order to get them to help him do the work that he wanted to do, his humanitarian work. And he says, quote, I have avoided religious people for most of my life, but admitted that he, quote, started to like these church people. After years of running from organized religion, Bono says he can now embrace it, warts and all, as a pragmatic partner. So I see that as his moon Neptune in Scorpio. Not only is the moon Neptune a symbol of being raised in a religious household, because the moon is our family, our home, where we've come from, and Neptune is the symbol for religion. But Scorpio has to do with really wanting to clear the dross, separating the fact from the fiction, or or uncovering. That's really what Scorpio wants to do. It wants to go deep and expose. And I think that is a significant expression of this moon Neptune and Scorpio in his chart, because it's like he doesn't just believe anything. He sees the contradictions, and he has to go deep into understanding for himself more what spirituality and religion is. And of course, this is happening sitting on the 9th house cusp, the 9th house, the Jupiterian house, the Sagittarian house of philosophies and religion and spirituality. So, he really has lived this part of his chart. And it's not that he doesn't have a relationship with God. It's just that he's had to do it in his own way over time. And this moon Neptune is also a symbol of the musical inspiration that came from his upbringing, because his father was really into opera and exposed him to listening to opera at a young age. But also it has to do with his ability to tune in and tap into those Neptunian vibrations, which is why Neptune is connected to music. You know, it's how you hear musical inspiration. Neptune can allow us to have that kind of sensitivity. And so his moon, his emotional expression, is connected to that sensitive, imaginative, creative part, which is Neptune. And that, to me, is another indication of his musical talent in his chart. Now, what's interesting is that that moon Neptune opposes his Mercury-Venus conjunction. And so, to me, this just has to do with perhaps, you know, some of the challenge he's had to sort of balance that Mercury, Venus, and Taurus, kind of nice guy, gentle person, but then opposite is that moon Neptune in Scorpio, where he really, you know, needs to discover things for himself. He won't just accept what people say or tell him, and you know, he's had to really fight for that in his life. So to me, that's what this opposition is symbolic of. But also, I mean, for them to be connected, those are the two parts of his chart that deal with music. And I feel that that opposition, you know, is a way, you know, oppositions create tension, and we have to resolve it by, in some ways, developing both aspects of the opposition. And I see that he's, you know, perhaps able to, when he's feeling like Mr. Nice Guy, it's just too much, you know, he might go into that place where he creates through his music and gets out some of that scorpionic angst and frustration through that creative musical process. Now, what's also very interesting in his chart is that he's got this beautiful grand trine, and it has to do with that Mercury Venus in Taurus trining his Jupiter in Capricorn, trining his Pluto in Virgo. And to me, when you have Jupiter and Pluto trine, Jupiter is expansion and growth. In Capricorn, hard work. Pluto is intensity and really power, and ability to really focus and harness energy. In the sign of Virgo, you know, that's being detail oriented, but also focusing on in some ways, like wanting to better, in some ways wanting to serve. You know, that's what Pluto in Virgo is about, is coming to a place where you want to be of service to others. So these two energies really give him a lot of power, and they give him a lot of strength. And then they trine that Mercury, Venus, and Taurus. You know, they all blend very beautifully. And I see this as his, you know, his ability to write music and to really focus and to work hard toward making, you know, his musical dreams a reality. This is an Earth grand trine, you know, in working in the practical material world to create. Now, this grand trine and the opposition that I talked about before all create what's called a kite in his chart. So it's the grand trine between Pluto, Jupiter, and Mercury and Venus, but then you've got the apex being that moon Neptune in Scorpio, which sextiles the Pluto and sextiles the Jupiter. So all that energy goes up to that moon Neptune in Scorpio at the top of his chart. And again, I feel, and I talked about it before, that in this configuration, the energy that has to be worked out is that opposition between Mercury and Venus and Taurus with the moon Neptune in Scorpio. And the way that some of that tension's worked out is with the help of the sextile from the moon Neptune to Pluto and the sextile of the moon Neptune to Jupiter. And Ultimately, though, it all comes out through that apex of the moon, Neptune, and Scorpio, which I've talked about is kind of this deep need for him to express his feelings, through his musical and creative process, but feelings that, he's trying to kind of resolve this sort of, wanting to expose things and get to the bottom of things and transform things, really. All right, one last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll move on to his transits. Well, two things. He does have a Mars at 29 degrees of Pisces. And if you read anything about Mars and Pisces, Mars is how we assert ourselves, our male strength. Pisces is, again, this sensitive energy. It feels, it senses. It's actually can be kind of a challenging place to have our Mars, especially as a man, because you think of like men as being strong, stereotypically, and forceful, but he's got that Mars in Pisces where it's more reserved, and it, when it wants to assert itself, it's sort of doing it in this like very sensitive way, very intuitive way. It's great for music. It's great for creating music because you can assert yourself through that Piscean nature by, tuning into subtleties and asserting themselves then, in that creative Piscean way. And I'm going to read again from the Astrologer's Handbook about Mars in Pisces, and they say that this position can help artistic and musical expression. So there it is, right there. Now, that Mars in Pisces in his chart is squared to Jupiter. It's an out of sign square, but that Jupiter in Capricorn probably is a place where he can garner some strength for that Mars in Pisces to implement his energy into creating. Jupiter wants to expand and grow, and it wants to do it, though, in a way that deals with working hard and having discipline. And it's interesting because I haven't mentioned this yet, but Jupiter in Capricorn really does have traditional perspectives, traditional beliefs, Jupiter in Capricorn. And when you think about it, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, and I'm going to go back to that Saturn on his ascendant as well. He really, out as a rock star, you haven't heard about him being like out of control. You haven't heard of like major drug addictions or major relationship problems where he was cheating on his partner. You just don't really hear that about him. And I attribute that to a few things in his chart. One is that Sun in Taurus. They really do love relationships. Then it's that Saturn on his ascendant. It's being a person with a sense of responsibility. But then also Jupiter in Capricorn too. It's like, there's somebody that has morals there and has standards there that they don't really want to violate. So anyway, I wanted to mention that part of his chart as well. And finally, he has got Uranus in Leo at 17 degrees. And I didn't mention this, but that tightly squares his Taurus sun. His Taurus sun is at 19 degrees of Taurus. And so that's a tight square between Sun and Uranus. So here's a few things. Uranus and Leo, that is the person who's going to be, very freedom-seeking and have a lot of humanitarian ideas as well, and be kind of the poster boy for it. Leo wants to be seen and looked at and noticed. So it's great that he's got that Uranus in Leo, and it sits in his 7th house of partnerships of all kinds, business, marriage, friendships. So he's really going to be somebody who can kind of be center stage in relationships that he wants to use his sort of humanitarian energy to get himself out there for a cause. And it also is interesting because to me it's like, Uranus in the 7th, that's probably somebody who, like he's had in his life, where he travels all the time for his music and for his projects. You know, he's got to have a very unusual kind of relationship where that kind of coming and going is okay. And he seems, you know, to have found that in the long relationship that he's had with his wife. But Uranus there in that 7th house indicates that somebody really needs a lot of freedom in their relationship. Freedom to do their, you know, their thing. And then going back to the fact that that Sun squares Uranus, that just means, you know, he's in some ways, even though he's sort of this sweet Taurus man, he's got a wild nature, and he's going to be a disruptor, and he's going to be somebody who wants to bring awareness to humanitarian issues. He's just not going to do it the way that everybody else does it. And I don't think he ever has in his life. And one of the comments that the drummer of the band has said about him is that when they were very young, getting together as a band, that Bono had a reputation for being the biggest personality in the school. And to me, that's part of his Sun squared Uranus. There's no mistaking them, especially with having Uranus and Leo. One thing that the Astrologer's Handbook writes about Sun squared Uranus is that these people can be leaders of groups and organizations, especially those that espouse human brotherhood. So you can see that is another connection to his humanitarian energy in his chart. And if you don't know, he is a big humanitarian trying to fight poverty and fight hunger and help cure AIDS. And a lot of the songs that the band writes about as a group, you know, they do have social bents and political bents and things that are trying to kind of wake people up to seeing what's going on and doing something about it. All right, so I want to talk about a few transits that are happening in his chart because, as I mentioned, he had that weird situation where he temporarily lost his voice and had to cancel a concert in Berlin at the beginning of September. And something interesting that he's been having happen is that transiting Uranus has been opposing his natal moon. So Uranus has been in the sign of Taurus, and his moon is at 2 degrees of Scorpio. So Uranus was slowing down at 2 degrees of Taurus, and then in August, early August of 2018, it went stationary retrograde opposite his moon, and moving very slowly still at that 2 degrees until about the second week of September. And right in the beginning of September is when he lost his voice. So to me, to have Uranus, it's something unexpected, you know, something that kind of takes us by surprise, happened to his voice. That Moon-Neptune conjunction in his chart, I feel, is one indication of why that may have happened. Now, there are definitely other things going on with Uranus opposite Moon transit. The Moon relates to our, you know, our emotional expression. It relates to our home life. Astromatrix.org writes about this transit, and by the way, it's a very rare transit because Uranus moves so slowly around the chart, so it doesn't happen more than once every 88 years, really, in opposition. They write, sudden events in your emotional and personal life are more likely during this transit. Your unconscious emotional patterns and habits will become a concern, and you may cause problems or upset within your home life. The moon signifies the emotional patterns and habits developed as a child, and these patterns can exist well into adulthood. It may be that you have a partner that gives you security or love in a similar way to that of your mother. Uranus will try to break down these old patterns and force you to examine your attitudes and beliefs. If these outdated patterns are a problem, then you may end up in a breakup with your partner. It's important to realize that even if this time is very upsetting, it is the order for you to grow and transform as an individual. Once you make the changes needed to let go of these old patterns, you will feel much more free and liberated than you have before. Now, again, this goes on until February of 2020. So, there's definitely time for this to kind of play itself out in his life. And it isn't to say there's going to be a breakup. It's just a time where he's awakening, having an opportunity to awaken to, certain ways of responding emotionally based on habit, Moon and Scorpio ways of responding. That would be like keeping things in, or or lashing out. But with the Moon so close to Neptune, it might be like, oh, I don't want to, hurt people, so I'm gonna, stay quiet. For some reason, I can't imagine him doing that. But, a lot of times these things can also be in some ways unconscious because we're dealing with the Moon. So it might be a time where you kind of realize that you're needing to change some of the ways that you're used to doing things. Now, what's also going on in his chart is that Pluto, by transit, is conjuncting his Saturn. That Saturn in Capricorn that sits right on his ascendant. Now, this started in February of 2017, and it completes in October of 2018. And this is a very rare transit because it takes Pluto 248 years to go around the solar system. So it's only going to come across your Saturn, if ever in a lifetime, once. And Pluto has to do with like deep transformation, death and transformation, and Saturn has to do with the structures that we've built up in our life. And Saturn has to do with, that sort of way that we always do things. Saturn on that ascendant, being that really responsible person, being the one that people can always rely on, but Pluto's coming around and kind of wanting to transform that aspect of who he is, ultimately for the better. And the futureminders.com talks about this transit, saying strong forces may bring a slow but profound change. There's an intense pressure that can cause you to realign your priorities, not always according to your own wishes. If you are indifferent to a defined objective, this cycle can help you to focus unambiguously on what must be done. That's because Pluto can bring about a really intense, penetrative quality to focus on things, to get to the bottom of things. It's almost an obsessive energy. In fact, I know they're touring now, and I believe they have also released a new album too, possibly in 2017. So perhaps this transit has coincided with some of that ability of his to really penetrate and focus and work hard, that's that Saturn, to accomplish a lot. They continue, when you are absolutely committed to a goal, this can give you the stamina and perseverance to overcome any resistance. And another interesting thing that he's been having is transiting Saturn's been conjuncting his Jupiter. This transit happens only every 30 years. This started in January and it completes in October of this year, 2018. And again, to me, the Saturn conjunct Jupiter, that Jupiter's in Capricorn, Saturn has been moving through Capricorn. Jupiter's expansion and growth and optimism and positivity. Saturn is discipline, hard work, containing too much, like, whoa, it's all out there, So again, another energy for really hard work this year. And I would say with his Saturn on his ascendant and his Jupiter in Capricorn, he probably is, good at focusing that Saturnian energy into hard work, and, that he'll go through this time with something to produce, or having produced something as a result of it. And finally, transiting Jupiter has been opposing his Sun, and I think this started in January of 2018 and actually completes at the end of this month, September of 2018. But Jupiter opposite Sun can be a culmination time where you see your effort reflected back to you. And I see that as part of this tour that he's on right now. You know, he's out there, sun and the Jupiter opposite sun. So he's shining his solar energy, and he's getting Jupiter reflected back to him through the opposition, you know. So he's probably going through a time where he's feeling optimistic about what they're doing, and getting a lot of positive feedback, you know, from people around them. So this has been my interpretation of Bono's chart. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you like my channel. You can also find me online at highaltitudeastrology.com. You can sign up for a daily blog that I send out that talks about the daily energies. And I also am on Instagram. Thanks so much. Adios.